And Todd, before we get started, I'm just going to read a brief statement, and then you guys are good to give us your fabulous presentation. I'm looking forward to it. So tell me when you're ready, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Okay. I think, Sarah, I think you're co-host. I don't know if I can, since you're already co-host, I can't make you host, but
I think you might have to see if you can make me host. You click on participant.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry to add the stress to you as you're getting ready to present, Jessica. I just was not on top of it the way I should have been.
Hold on. Stop sharing my screen. The option's there. It's just not doing it. Oh, there we go. Okay, yeah. Sharing screen makes everything more complicated. Okay, that should be fine. I will turn it over to you, Sarah, and then I'll go ahead and share my screen once you introduce us.
All right. Well, I'll go ahead and get started now if you guys are ready. Thank you for joining us for this session on Milestone Medals, celebrating the impact of OER projects, presented by Jessica Kirshner and Todd Easter. My name is Sarah Northam, and I will be the moderator for this session. I am joined by Cindy Gurrell, who will be the backup moderator. I will be monitoring chat for any questions, and Cindy will be answering any technical questions that you might have. We ask that everyone in this session adhere to the OESS Code of Conduct. I have placed a link for the Code of Conduct in the chat box, but I want to emphasize a few things before we begin. The Open Education Southern Symposium strives to offer an open, inclusive, and friendly environment for all participants. All attendees are expected to help maintain a professional and welcoming environment free of any type of harassment. Together, we can create a space where individuals feel free to express themselves, work together, and come up with solutions to today's unique challenges. The organizers of OESS appreciate your help in making this symposium a friendly and welcoming virtual experience. Please note that all sessions are being recorded, and then I'll drop the link to the Code of Conduct in the chat right now. Todd and Jessica, I'm looking forward to your presentation.
Thanks, Sarah. I'll go ahead and share my screen again. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for coming to our presentation today. As Sarah said, I'm Jessica Kirshner. I'm the OER librarian at Virginia Commonwealth University, and I'm here today with my colleague Todd Easter, who is a web designer at VCU, and we're going to be talking about our Milestone Medals program, which celebrates the impact of our grant-funded OER projects. So some quick background. VCU is a large urban R1 institution with a student population of almost 30,000. We have both the academic and medical campus, variety of subjects. We have a well-known art school, school of medicine, kind of everything in between. And all this just to say we have a large institution, so we have a robust OER program and a dedicated staff, me, to run it. So our Open Affordable Course Content Initiative, as we call it, began in 2016-17 and provides support for textbook affordability through both library ebooks and OER. And as a part of our initiative, we do run a grant program, which we call our Affordable Course Content Awards, which provide support for faculty who are transitioning to free textbooks in their courses. Our grant program provides both funding and publishing support for these projects. It began in 2017, and we just awarded our 6th cohort, actually had our kickoff meeting yesterday afternoon, which is exciting. Over that time, we've supported 32 projects. And the projects that have been implemented, not all are there yet, but those that have impacted over 30,000 students and seen over $3 million in cost avoidance. I just wanted to note that while we do have some adopt projects, most of them are on the create side, which is just interesting in terms of interest. And also those create projects are a little more labor intensive, which I'll talk about in a little bit. If you're interested in learning more about our grant program, I included the link at the bottom here, which also includes some descriptions of projects, the projects that we funded. So why were we inspired to create the Milestone Medals project? So our grant programs acknowledge promises of the project. People apply saying, they want to adopt, customize, or create an OER for a specific course. We think it sounds great. We give them funding and project support, but that's really it. The actual work To adopt, customize, or create OER is intensive, as I'm sure we all know. It's also basically unrecognized labor. Yes, the funding we provide through the grant program does offset some of that, but by and large, it really doesn't cover all the work that goes into OER. Further than that, excuse me, once projects are implemented, there's really no recognition for the impact of the projects. And sometimes faculty get student feedbacks through course evaluations or other surveys. Sometimes faculty do research projects which study the impact, which can be a way to include it on P&T. But besides for that, there's really not a lot of avenues for inclusion of OER in P&T. I know there's been some steps in this direction, like the Doers 3 matrix. I know, some adaptations that have come for that, but there's really formalized inclusion of OER in P&T is not very common. On the other side of the coin, I collect a lot of data for our grant program. Every semester, I ask awardees to let me know if they're using their resources in a course, and I use that information to calculate the impact of the program, mostly to demonstrate value to our administration, to make sure the initiative keeps going, to make sure we have budget for the awards program in the next year. Also to demonstrate the value to donors. We do get some funding for our grant program from our friends of the library, and more generally to celebrate and share the success of our efforts with the greater community. So you might see these numbers in libraries' annual reports, but really this is all on the programmatic level. There's nothing that speaks specifically to the impact of our individual projects. So I wanted to think about whether there was a way to share the impact data I'm already collecting to begin to articulate and acknowledge the impact of our projects, which is something that really kind of goes unacknowledged up until this point. So the goal for these medals was to convert these abstract efforts, the abstract impact, to numerical measurements, to make them a little bit more concrete, to hopefully provide a good pathway for understanding to those who aren't involved with either the project specifically or OER efforts. Those that aren't involved with OER creation or adoption might not really understand the amount of labor that goes into this work. And so we wanted a way to be able to kind of normalize that, make it more relatable to people who weren't familiar, and also provide an avenue for potentially for more formalized inclusion in recognition structures through potential benchmarking. With that in mind, though, there were some considerations. Our projects vary a lot in size and impact. So I included two here on kind of opposite ends of the spectrum. We have our Bio 151 class, which is not Bio 101 as the next level up, but still a very large enrollment course, sees over 1,000 students a year, has an expensive textbook, over $200. We awarded this grant in 2018, and they've already seen over $1 million in cost avoidance. So it's a pretty big project. On the other end of the spectrum, we have this research methods class in our Masters for Sport Leadership. They have about 35 students a year. That's the size of the program, so that's not going to increase. The textbook is also smaller or less expensive, only about $50. So their impact is much smaller. And we do have a lot of these smaller projects in our grant program, which kind of reflects my philosophy in regards to the grant program. We have state grants, which they were actually talking about in the previous presentation, that can support larger projects. So it is important to me if smaller projects apply, even though the impact might be smaller, to still support them because they do make a valuable impact for our students and make a valuable contribution to the OER community, maybe filling a gap in subject matter. So we have a lot of small projects, but also a couple of big projects. So kind of how do we balance both of those? And then thinking about where and how to recognize this impact. So, I can send a gold star to my projects, but that's really not going to do anything. I'm thinking about kind of what recognition and where that would actually make a difference. So I started by building on the existing data. I said I have information on students impacted, cost savings. That's really why I shared that earlier in the presentation. Should build on that if I already have it. We are also thinking about doing non-project size dependent categories, thinking about how many semesters a project was used. And I have an asterisk there because we didn't end up rolling that out on our first category because we were struggling to think a little bit about what kind of levels to go with, which brings me to the next point, the levels. So what kind of benchmarks do we want to set? So we ended up going with some gradually increasing numbers, which I'll be honest, I determined somewhat arbitrarily, but you can see them listed here, kind of trying to capture both the small and the larger potential impacts of projects. So with all of that in mind, we moved to medal design. So I'm going to turn it over to Todd, who did the design work for this project.
Yes. In consideration of the design, we wanted to make sure that the medals were easy to comprehend at first glance. We opted for a very simple layout and design language, nothing too detailed, nothing too realistic, but we also didn't want a cartoonish feel to the medals. We wanted to make sure the medals were clear in messaging, the designs needed to be self-explanatory, and the ranking system be easily understood. We also wanted the medals to feel serious, to have weight, and to really recognize and celebrate the impact our OER efforts were having on student success. Next slide, please. As far as the design for the medals, I'm most familiar with the Adobe Creative Suite. So the designs were initially started in work in Illustrator, but I moved over to Photoshop later just because I'm a little bit quicker there. The comps for the medals included Olympic medals, diplomas, and award seals, but we very early on in the process ruled out any kind of 3D design or something with a relief, as they can be hard to understand on screens. Next slide, I think. Yes. The medals were grouped in 4 ranking levels. This made it easy for us to use the common color convention of bronze, silver, gold for easy understanding of the levels of the medals. We chose white for the base level just because it was a very simple design. And with the black overlay that was chose, it ensured easy contrast for accessibility, just to make sure that everything was able to be read properly. Next slide.
Thanks, Todd. So alongside the medals, I decided to release a recognition letter, which provided some more formal acknowledgement of reaching that milestone rather than just having the medals, which I think are exciting and cool. I know that having a letter to be able to include in P&T documentation might make a little bit more difference for our faculty. I made sure this letter related our project and impact values to the values the project and impact to the values of P&T and our institutional values. So, for example, VCU strategic plan has goals that include student success, advancing innovation, and national prominence, which I think we can all agree align pretty well with OER. So I made sure that in the letter, which are customized based on each project, to mention 1 to 3 of these goals. So looking towards implementation, I hold a get together for all our awardees every January. It's an opportunity to create community from current awardees and past awardees to hear about each other's projects, to learn from each other, et cetera. So in January 2021, while we were still working on finalizing design, I mentioned that this project was coming up to get a little feedback from the awardees and share my excitement, to be honest. So one of the things I got feedback on initially, I was going to give people a certificate every time they reached a milestone level and then offer these letters upon request. People weren't really interested in the certificates. They thought the letters would have more impact. So I got rid of the certificates, less work for me, which is great, and also more impact for the projects. When I emailed faculty to ask them to share their usage with me in fall 2021, I reminded them of the launch, which, to be honest, was partially to hopefully help reinforce the need to collect that information. Some of our faculty are good at getting back to me. Some it's a little bit more like pulling teeth. So reinforcing that not only was the information I was collecting helpful to me as program manager, but also would be helpful to them was hopefully a good step in getting them actually to contribute that information. So in fall 2021, we had a soft launch. I posted the medals on the program site. I wrote a public description to give some context rather than just throwing the medals up there. And I sent all the awardees an email letting them know that we had launched the program. So on our program site, each project has a descriptive box like this, which includes information about the project, the team, some key features, any updates. And now it has this nice area describing the VCU impact levels. We ended up calling this publicly the VCU Impact Levels. We thought it was a little more formal, might have a little bit more resonance and impact with those formal recognition structures and those not involved with the program. Although internally, I still do call it the Milestone Medals program. But you can see in this box for everyone that has reached a certain level, they have the medals, which spoilers, we did end up doing the semesters used, and we'll talk about that in a couple slides. And it'll also have the accompanying level written out in text, as well as the semester that each milestone was reached. As well, each cohort has its own page on the program website, and each page has this little descriptive box telling people about the program. So if they're wondering what those numbers are, this is some context, and the link links to a more detailed document, which includes more notes, as well as a listing of all the current medals. I do want to note that on both pieces of contextual description, I did make sure to emphasize that impact levels are not meant to be comparable across projects. As I said earlier, we do have a wide range of projects, and I don't want people comparing that, $1 million project to the ones that are much smaller. I have been using the word benchmarks, but I try not to. That's why we try to use, milestones or levels, because just because a project is saving more money doesn't mean it's a better project. It just means that it, might have more students enrolled in the classes or have a more expensive textbook. So all types of impacts should be celebrated, even if they might seem different based on these levels. Based on our soft launch in the fall, we did add additional levels. When I was calculating impact, I noticed some of our smaller projects didn't even meet the bottom threshold, and I wanted still to be able to celebrate their work. So we added some additional categories or additional levels. And then we also added that additional semester of use category. So these are the final ones that we're currently using. You can see there's the additional lower categories in both student savings and student impacted, and then the semesters used, which we decided to go 1 through 5 to catch those new projects or ones that might not be offered every semester, and then go by 5s to try to catch the larger projects. That way, don't have to update it every semester. It's kind of more meaningful and has more longevity. And Todd is going to talk about the medals.
Yes. As was said, this was a late addition to the project, so we opted to kind of step outside of the design a little bit for the other medals. Also, they don't have the rankings that the previous medals did or that we included. So we opted for a design that kind of blended the low and high rank, so there really isn't any kind of visual distinction between the medals. It's more just about the semesters used.
Great, thanks, Todd. So we fully launched in spring 2022. I updated any medals that were on the site or added new ones. I drafted those recognition letters, and then I sent an email to the project team, like you can see example on the right side of the screen, letting them know the milestone they had reached, alerting them to the letter that was attached, sharing a little bit about the program, and then giving them some suggestions or offers, where they could include the medals, offering to customize letters if they thought they wanted to highlight something that would be resonate more with their P&T committees, things like that. I'm happy to say that our design files are openly licensed. They are available on our institutional repository, Scholars Compass. I will say we do use Digital Commons, so PDF is required as the main file, so it's that contextual document that I shared earlier. But if you scroll all the way to the bottom of the page, you can find the Photoshop files for the medals. And if you're interested in my recognition letter that goes along with them, I'm happy to share it. Just feel free to email me. So our reception so far has been positive. I meet with our awardees one-on-one every month or every other month, and all the feedback I've gotten has been overwhelmingly positive. Everyone's excited and appreciative. although it's mostly been in those meetings, it hasn't really been formally. I will say that one of the exciting pieces of feedback I got was that we had one of our projects share the letter, the impact that they had made with their project with their department. And then the department then supported them applying for an additional grant to convert another course to OER in our latest cycle, which we actually awarded. So that's not quite P&T, but it does speak to changes in departmental culture, which is equally as exciting to me. Our people are using medals in a variety of ways. You can see on the left, someone has included it in their signature. On the right is on the actual OER itself. These are our larger projects. Most of them are not over 1 million. These are just the two that are excited to share it that I have images of, but I think it looks really cool that they are sharing them widely and it's not just on our program site. Impact on P&T is still too early to tell. As I said, we just launched in spring, so a full P&T cycle hasn't gone through, but we do have one faculty who asked for a letter from an associate dean or the dean of the libraries, which is one of the things that I offered in the email. The letters come from me as the program manager, but as I'm sure many of you can appreciate, sometimes having that administrative letter can resonate more with P&T committees. So we put together an accompanying letter from the associate dean a week or two ago, and she's going to go up for promotion this year, and hopefully that will work well. Moving forward, going to continue mentioning it when I ask awardees to report resource usage. Again, emphasizing the fact that the data collecting is not just for me, it's also for them. Continue making those impact calculations and updates to the medals when new milestones are reached. I'm going to monitor levels for the possible need to add additional levels. So we put the thresholds quite high at the top to try to catch all of them. But for some of our projects that are being used a lot and continually, as long as they continue to be used, which I hope and seems to be the case, they probably will surpass those levels at some point. So keep an eye on that and think about when we need to make a new level and how we want to do that. And then continue to gather feedback on the program itself and the letters, especially as it relates to P&T. Although I do want to emphasize that I do plan on continuing doing this, whether or not it actually does turn out to have impact on P&T. I think, our faculty are so unrecognized for all the labor that we do that having, any kind of recognition structure and celebration of the work that they're doing, even if it only scratches the surface of the true impact of their OER projects, is important. So I will continue to do this regardless. So thank you for coming. Todd's going to draw up a link to our slides if you're interested. I know we're almost at the end, but we might have time for questions, or feel free to reach out to either of us if you have any questions. Thank you.
Jessica and Todd, I love this idea. This is really neat.
Thank you.
I'm going to have to go back and watch this again and show it to my dean, because I was like, oh, like they did with that. Does anyone have any questions for Jessica and Todd? We have a few minutes before 11 o'clock. Cool. So I guess I do have a question. You said that you'd gotten positive feedback from faculty. Have you had a lot of inquiries about the program from people who aren't necessarily, how do I want to phrase this? Have you had questions from people who maybe aren't using OER as much, or want to know more about the program or what OER is, kind of like faculty who maybe haven't been into that yet?
I wish. When I talk about faculty in this context, I'm really just talking about our awardees. But I mean, that's the goal overarching, but we're still kind of early. So we'll see if it happens, but that would be the goal.
That would be the goal.
Yeah.
And I do have a question here from Melissa. Can you talk a little bit more about the data collection process? I don't think we have a centralized way at my institution to know who is using OER.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. For this process, it's solely collecting information based on our grantees. So I would love to be able to collect OER usage from non-grantees. And if anyone has an idea, I mean, I would love to hear it. It seems like Melissa would love to hear it as well. But we've just been focusing on our grantees since that's kind of the people that I have relationships with. I know they're using projects or they have OER. We have an existing relationship. And on the medals, you can see currently they're actually branded with our grant name. So it's really tied very closely to the grant program. Yeah. I see Jennifer's comment about non-grantee OER users can be found. And I agree. I have a form up on